That's right, and we're actually looking at that trunk separation to happen in about 3 minutes.
Deorbit sequence start.
And we've heard
Dragon copy.
good calls from the core here in Mission Control Hawthorne. That's the Mission Control room you see on your screen. To the crew, another good interior shot. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, that's Anna Kikina, the Roscosmos cosmonaut. That has flown on Crew 5. And then we are also on the other side of the spacecraft. We didn't get a good look at him, but it's Koichi Wakata, the JAXA astronaut that has joined us as well. So again, good calls. We've heard good confirmation of suit leak checks up until this point. As you can see, the astronauts are in their suits and seats after they had some time to rest and relax over the past, what's it been, 18-ish hours since they undocked yesterday.
Yeah, like everything that occurs on the International Space Station, everything is scheduled, it's choreographed, including that sleep period, that crew rest period, where basically the crew got to clock off duty and rest, relax, enjoy the view, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at this point in time, like we mentioned, we are coming up to the separation of the claw, which is the mechanism that holds that trunk, that unpressurized section of the Dragon capsule onto the pressurized section. So we're about a minute away from that claw separation, and then trunk separation will occur in about a minute and a half. So yeah, that trunk, like we said before, is the unpressurized section. That's where we can store cargo that is able to be exposed to the vacuum of space. And of course, the astronauts are in the pressurized section. But that heat shield is located at the bottom of the pressurized section. So it's currently being covered up by that trunk. So we'll separate the trunk to expose that heat shield.
Another important thing to note is when we do claw separation, we're separating those umbilicals that connect the trunk to the pressurized section or the actual Dragon capsule where the astronauts are. So the solar cells that are wrapped around the trunk, those will of course be detached, and once we dispose of the trunk, Dragon itself will be on internal battery power.
Yeah, so pretty exciting. All of this, you know, as you mentioned, Leah, it's been 18 hours of progress. But at this point in time, to prepare for the upcoming events, right now the Dragon spacecraft is doing a couple of things autonomously, meaning it's doing it on its own. It's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very comfortable for Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna during that reentry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism. Like I said, that's coming up in about 10 seconds or so. And that will terminate, like Leah just said, that data, the power, and the fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk. So we're standing by to listen for the call out for trunk separation.
And I got one update that we are in the proper attitude for that trunk separation. So
Awesome.
just one more of those checks that we were standing by to hear. Again, we are just in a waiting game until we have that claw and trunk separation. But that
Nominal trunk jettison.
All right, there's that call. Great news.
right on time.
Dragon copy.
So as you can hear, that, like we mentioned, is the core calling out to the crew. They report that they copy because they're able to keep track of it on those crew displays that we could see over their shoulders. So again, the claw and trunk just separated. The claw is where those umbilicals for power and telemetry are from the trunk, and its solar arrays connect to the capsule. So now that they've disconnected, again, Dragon is exclusively on battery power. And we just additionally got that confirmation of successful trunk jettison as well, coming right on time at about 5:06 p.m. Pacific. So with that trunk separation, telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is now exposed. The trunk is no longer needed. That is setting us up for our deorbit burn here coming up, scheduled to start at 5:11 p.m. Pacific time. Again, we anticipate that will last about 11 minutes.
Yeah, that burn is an important one. That is what commits the crew to that location. Like we said, we're setting up for a landing off the coast of Tampa, Florida, and it's that deorbit burn that is the final burn that Dragon performs to really re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Now, up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to re-entry, the slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude and the deorbit burn itself. Leah, you did indicate that that attitude was correct and that we're going to start that deorbit burn soon. That will be the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the four thrusters located on top of the vehicle near the nose cone. It's the last time that those will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida. And like Leah said, it'll last about 11 minutes once it begins.
And again, we're tracking that to come around 5:11 p.m. Pacific, so 8:11 p.m. Eastern time. And we are actually under an hour now until our anticipated splashdown time. So when we say things are happening fast, they are happening pretty fast. But again, this is an autonomous flight like we've seen with Dragon in the past. And our 4 crew members are riding comfortably, it appears. Their visors are still up. Once we get closer to that deorbit burn, we anticipate to hear a call from the core to the crew to go ahead and lower their visors just as a precautionary measure ahead of that major burn.
That's right. And the crew has already completed the required suit leak checks. It's basically when they pull all the zippers up, close the visor into the locked position, and the Dragon spacecraft pressurizes or basically flows a little bit of that air into the suits and holds it at a certain pressure for a certain amount of time, usually a couple minutes, just to make sure that those suits are basically all the zippers are in place and that seal with the visor is functional, and really just making sure that the spacesuit provides its own individual environment for the crew member during the more dynamic events of today's procedures. So like Leah just said, we can see that those visors are still up, but we know that they've already completed the suit leak checks, had 4 good leak checks there. This is also a great shot because you can see the tablet on Commander Nicole Mann's leg. So those are the tablets that are used for monitoring Dragon's progress and the different statuses and states that the vehicle is in. It's also what they use to log the consumables during flight. So we talked before about that period of time where the crew is off duty. They can do whatever they want to do. And as you can imagine, staying hydrated is important, and they use those tablets to track how much water they drank and out of which water bottle it was. So it's just helping to make sure that everything is accounted for. Like we said, we're coming up to the deorbit burn. We're about 5 seconds away from that burn start.
Now, again, this is going to be an 11-minute burn, approximately. Just over 11 minutes. It's pretty large. We've got to slow the astronauts down from orbital velocity at 17,500 miles per hour and put them on that track to Tampa, Florida, and that splashdown. If you look, you can see the windows near Josh Cassada's feet. Actually, it's in the background, but it's bright. It's clearly they're in an orbital daylight. But when you're traveling at orbital velocity, 17,500 miles per hour, you see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes. And if you look on their crew displays, it looks like you can see some of the thrusters are firing. So sounds like the deorbit burn is underway. Again, started right on time at 5:11 p.m. Pacific, targeting about 11 minutes for that burn.
We're looking at about 10 minutes and 20 seconds remaining in that deorbit burn.
Within just the last 10 minutes, Dragon jettisoned its trunk. It initiated that deorbit burn about 2 minutes ago now. So for these operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard and have established a safety zone to ensure public safety, safety of those involved, and in the recovery operations, as well as, of course, our crew on board the returning spacecraft. So multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance and during recovery operations. And Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. So we want to take a moment to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and so any other boats interfering in this process can increase risk to the astronauts in the capsule, those teams working to recover them from the water, and of course even the safety of any public boaters. So for the safety of the crew and yours, we recommend tuning in here. Just sit back and watch. We're going to give you the best views of our astronauts on their way home.
Like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire. Dragon Endurance has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site off the coast of Tampa, Florida. As you can see on your screen there right now, Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna are using their screens to keep tabs on that burn duration, the Draco thruster firings, which you can see lighting up on those displays in front of them, the trajectory details like the entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. So in that center screen, you can actually see their trajectory, their planned trajectory there. Dragon is flying itself, so all of the crew, all that the crew has to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things, which I know for me personally, I love looking out windows when I'm traveling, especially in airplanes, and so I imagine if I were flying, this part would be really hard for me because I just want to get out of my seat and look out the window.
Those last few space views, I'm with you. I'm always a window seat girl.
Now, with Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna ready to deorbit and splash down back on planet Earth, they'll be heading to one of 7 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations actually helps to maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather. So pretty helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So yesterday, NASA and SpaceX together selected primary and alternate splashdown locations. Obviously, our primary, as we've discussed, is off the coast of Tampa, Florida, and the alternate is Daytona. This selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, the landing sites available, and favorable weather, as you mentioned. Of course, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedule for those returning crew members.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for re-entry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always have to make sure that the crew is properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them. Trajectory and ballistics experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with the 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers until line up with this selected primary site, but it can also change to different alternate sites while in free flight if sudden weather moves in that we need to avoid. That's something we're currently or constantly looking at as weather, so we make the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. For the Crew 5 return, as always, we look at a number of weather items. Some of those more obvious ones are no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew in the capsule and the recovery teams on the water. We're also looking for wind speeds less than 15 feet per second, or about 10 miles per hour, and relatively calm seas so we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna back to Florida. Now, I have heard the weather described in 4 different ways for this Tampa site. I've heard go, very go, home run, and stupendous. So it sounds like they have a pretty nice landing site waiting for them today.
I think one time we also got super go.
Oh, wow. That's another level. So once Dragon began flying free yesterday, there were a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed toward the primary site, head to the alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks happened all the way up until we are in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which started about 6 minutes ago. That's this last burn in the trip home, and it commits the Dragon capsule to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
Before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a minute to meet our crew.
First up is Nicole Mann on the left side of the screen there. She's the California native who holds a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering and is a colonel in the Marine Corps. She was an FA-18 Hornet and Super Hornet test pilot and deployed twice aboard aircraft carriers in support of combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nicole was selected by NASA in June 2013 and in the years that followed led the astronaut corps in the development of hardware in the Artemis program. She is the Dragon commander for Crew 5, which was her first space flight. She's right there in the foreground of the shot monitoring this deorbit burn, and she is also the first Native American woman to stay on the International Space Station.
Sitting next to Nicole is Josh Cassida, who grew up in Bear Lake, Minnesota. The physicist and U.S. Navy test pilot flew 23 combat missions and later became an instructor at the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School, which is a common path military officers to take to join NASA. Cassida is one of more than 100 graduates who became astronauts going back to the Mercury program. On Earth, he served as capsule commander in mission control, but for his first space flight on Crew 5, he has served as pilot on Dragon.
In the role of mission specialist, you can't see him here. He's to the left of Nicole. That's Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata. Koichi has a doctorate in aerospace engineering and in 1996 became the first Japanese mission specialist aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour for STS-72. In addition to his current mission, Koichi flew 4 Space Shuttle missions, a Roscosmos Soyuz, and was on a long-duration stay aboard the International Space Station. And just on March 6th, just a few days ago, Koichi reached his 500th day in space.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. The second mission specialist is Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina. She graduated from the this is a tough one, Novosibirsk State Academy of Water Transport in 2006. In 2012, Anna officially became a candidate for the position of test cosmonaut. Crew 5 was Anna's first flight into space as part of the resumption of integrated crews on U.S. Crew spacecraft and the Soyuz with the Russian State Space Corporation, Roscosmos.
Now we are still in that deorbit burn. Those crew members now about 42 minutes away from that targeted splashdown time of 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. It looks like we have about 2 minutes left, maybe a minute and a half in that deorbit burn, but things are going well so far. All of those 4 Draco engines firing for the last time before closing that nose cone and preparing the capsule for reentry.
There on your screens, you can see the crew is continuing to monitor Dragon's progress in this deorbit burn. We have about a minute and a half, 1 minute and 31 seconds to be exact, remaining in this burn. As you can see with those displays, there's a small set of physical buttons that the crew can use for emergency situations. And then the displays are touchscreen, which has more features that they can use in flight, in addition to the tablets that are on their legs. You can see Nicole's there on her left leg. We can also see a good shot of the control panel for the seats themselves. That's where the mic volume and the push-to-talk button is also located for the crew to use. And I believe that's also where the crew cabin light button is located. So just like an airplane, everybody has their own personal window, or excuse me, personal light that they can use.
Reading light.
To read, exactly. There's also USB ports in the Dragon capsule as well.
That's convenient.
Yeah, not on the chairs. It's kind of like above their heads, so they can't really reach them while in flight, but certainly useful during the opportunities where they don't have to be in their seats and can charge up those tablets that they use.
Now, continuing to monitor, again, we are in the deorbit burn and should be wrapping up here very shortly. Crew members just monitoring as this is a completely autonomous flight.
10 seconds remaining in this deorbit burn. That deorbit burn is...
Deorbit burn complete. Performance nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
Dragon copy.
Just what we wanted to hear. Deorbit burn is complete. Nominal is always the word we're looking for. And so with that complete, next up is closure of the nose cone, since we won't be using those Draco thrusters anymore.
That's right. That nose cone is what protects those Draco thrusters, as well as that forward hatch, which is the hatch that the crew, of course, used to dock to the space station and get in and out of Dragon while it was docked on station. That side hatch is what they will be using, or the side hatch, which is on the side of Dragon, is what they will be using to get out of the capsule after splashdown, but not that forward hatch, which is what is being covered up now or what will be covered up as we step into nose cone closure.
Wow.
And there we can see a live view of that nose cone closing on Dragon Endurance.
So in the Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn. Those are inhibited now, I should say, meaning that it was safe to latch the nose cone shut. And the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. This will help keep Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna cool and comfortable during re-entry, which is coming up in about 20 minutes. At this point, like we saw, the nose cone is closing, protecting the forward hatch for reentry. So Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna are using their screens to continue monitoring the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
That's exactly right. Now we have a live view there of Mission Control Hawthorne, actually located just to the side of Leah and I. That is where the calls are coming from that we hear to the crew, coming from SpaceX Core Mike Blasco. Another view there of that nose cone closing. There's about another minute and 14 seconds remaining in the nose cone close. But yeah, those calls that we hear to the crew and basically communicating status of what's happening or what has completed, that comes from that room that you see there on your screen.
We're standing by for the confirmation of nose cone closure. We are now about 18 hours since undock yesterday. So we've mentioned that the crew has had time to rest, relax, maybe eat a little bit, take a nap. But right now are monitoring the continuation of nose cone closure, just waiting on that call out to the crew.
About 30 seconds remaining now to nose cone close. As we said before, since we won't be using the 4 forward Draco thrusters, and obviously the hatch is sealed and shut, we are able to close that nose cone. It's an important step because ultimately this is the, now that the trunk has been separated, this is the last major physical change that Dragon will undergo prior to deorbit burn.
Dragon that the 5 crew members are flying on today is named Endurance. It was dubbed that by the Crew 3 crew in honor of the endurance shown by the NASA and SpaceX teams as they were building the spacecraft and training the crew through the pandemic. So I thought that was a really nice way to honor both the teams.
Very fitting for sure. So we're standing by for the call out to confirm that the nose cone has been closed. Again, this is the last major physical change that Dragon undergoes prior to that deorbit burn, or excuse me, prior to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. They've already completed the deorbit burn itself.
Yes.
So this nose cone closure is an important, one of the last steps prior to that re-entry.
That deorbit burn really commits us to returning to Earth. There's not really any waving off after that happens.
And as we mentioned before, we are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Tampa, Florida.
And a look here at both teams monitoring the mission. Over on the left is Mission Control in Hawthorne, and on the right is Mission Control at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Home sweet home. They were in joint operations while Dragon was docked to the International Space Station and until the spacecraft exited the approach ellipsoid. So now the teams are continuing to watch the re-entry of the spacecraft and prepare to welcome the astronauts home, but in a monitoring mode now, since we are obviously quite a ways away from the International Space Station itself. And as for the crew on the International Space Station, they are in a sleep period right now, but they do have the opportunity to watch these broadcasts and watch their friends arrive back on Earth. So hopefully, if they're watching, they still take some time to get a little shut-eye later tonight.
So at this point in time, the nose cone is closed. We're just waiting for that to be called out to the crew from the SpaceX core. Next up will be to initiate that nitrox suit purge. Again, that just helps to keep the crew super comfortable during that re-entry period.
And then coming up a little bit later tonight, around 5:50 p.m. Pacific time, that's when the entry of the spacecraft will begin. And during that time, we anticipate to lose communication with the spacecraft as plasma is building up around it. It is traveling through the atmosphere. Eventually, we will regain that signal and communication with the crew members. But of course, Dragon knows exactly what it's doing that entire way home. They are just monitoring and getting closer and closer to splashdown. Again, targeting splashdown for 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:02 p.m. Pacific, off the coast of Tampa, Florida. Nose cone closure continues. It looks like the first set of hooks is closed and the second set is closing as we speak. For our 4 crew members on Crew 5, for 3 of them, this was their first space flight. So Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina are all coming home with 157 days in space. As we mentioned earlier, Koichi Wakata this is his 5th space flight. So he is coming home with a total of 505 days in space.
And in following along with the procedures that the crew are stepping through.
Nose cone secured for entry.
Dragon copy.
And there is that confirmation of nose cone closure that we were standing by for. Now, as we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject that cooled nitrox or nitrogen-oxygen mixture into the air being delivered to the suits worn by Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna. Again, that's what will allow the crew to remain super comfortable while the external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little warm on the outside. That heat shield is pointing forward, leading the capsule to the landing site. And speaking of the heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of PICA 3.0, which stands for Phenolic Impregnated Carbon Ablator. The first generation PICA was actually first developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
Yeah, so SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop PICA X, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 commercial resupply missions that successfully resupplied the station on on 20 missions. PICA 3.0 was developed specifically for use on Dragon 2 crew and cargo spacecraft with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down the cost and mass.
The remainder of Dragon capsule is composed primarily of a SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection, which is lighter weight versus Pika and protects the underlying composite structure during that reentry to ensure that the structural capabilities are maintained.
So while Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit during peak re-entry conditions, the characteristics of the thermal protection systems, also referred to as TPS, coupled with the environmental cooling and life support system, which we refer to as ECLIS, that's in the pressurized interior, that will ensure that Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna stay cool and comfortable during all phases of re-entry through splashdown.
After Crew Dragon Endurance has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. The first will be 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes to guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in April last year. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
The vehicle velocity at the drogue deploy parachute timing is about 350 miles per hour. So they deployed about 18,000 feet. Now the vehicle velocity when the main parachutes deploy is at approximately 119 miles per hour. They'll deploy at about 6,500 feet. And when we have our water splashdown, the spacecraft is traveling cool and comfortable, approximately 16 miles per hour. So the highest G load we expect the crew to experience during reentry is about 3 to 5 Gs. So again, with nose cone closure, we don't have a whole lot of visual changes, like you mentioned, that we will see. And our crew members are already in their suits and in their seats, as we had a preview of earlier. So coming up next will be our anticipated loss of signal around 5:48 p.m. Pacific time. The crew just got an update on that from CORE here in Hawthorne before we started the broadcast. So again, when we're in that entry period and plasma is building up around the spacecraft, it makes it hard for us to communicate back and forth. So during that time, we won't have communication with the astronauts or the spacecraft itself. However, again, Dragon is fully autonomous and continues guiding those crew members to our splashdown site in Tampa.
That's right. That expected loss of signal, or LOS, as you'll hear it called out, is coming up in 14 minutes on the dot, actually. And it's something that happens every time one of the Crew Dragon capsules returns to Earth. It lasts only a few minutes, but it's something that we will hopefully at that time be able to have some views of Dragon as it is re-entering the atmosphere. But of course, after that, that entry point, like we mentioned before, those parachutes will deploy shortly thereafter, starting with those 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the main parachutes, which are those beautiful orange and white big parachutes that we just love to see during that re-entry.
And of course, the recovery ship tonight that will be recovering the crew from the waters off the coast of Tampa is Shannon, named in honor of Shannon Walker, who flew on the Crew 1 mission back in 2020. Can't believe it's been 3.5 years now.
So at this point in time, as we mentioned before, we are a few minutes away from the next major milestones, about 12 minutes and 45 seconds from that anticipated LOS. We are taking your social questions from social media. If you have one, be sure to use the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll try to get to them as we can. Sometimes, especially after splashdown, there's some waiting periods. So we'd love to take some questions. We have a couple already, so let's check out what that first one is. This one comes to us from Anchari. What At what number is the space station at capacity? Are there interactions between the crew from different countries? That's a great question. I think the fact that it's called the International Space Station is definitely indicative of those interactions that take place among the crew while they are on station. I personally love seeing photos of the crew whenever they're sharing meals together. If they can, I've seen photos where they like to bring up food from that is representative of their country or their culture and share it with the other crew members on board. It's just something I love seeing the crew do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, different cultures have different holidays as well. So sometimes they share those sorts of traditions. And it's definitely the International Space Station. Sometimes they work together on projects or even on spacewalks. Our JAXA astronaut, Koichi Wakata, went out on, I believe, 2 spacewalks with Nicole Mann, our NASA astronaut, during their stay at the International Space Station. So a lot of working together while they are on board. And of course, there's a lot of work going on the ground between our partner countries as we prepare for these missions. And the question also was a limit to the number of people on the International Space Station. So for the past week, we had 11 people on the space station.
Sounds cozy.
It does. It sounds a little cozy, but the space station is also pretty big. And twice it has housed 13 people. So I don't know that there is a max limit that we have established or determined at this time, but we've seen 13 a couple of times before, and we just wrapped up a full house of 11.
Let's take a look at another one coming to us from Jiu-Jitsu Panda. I love that. Can the astronauts work out or exercise on the space station? Thank you ahead of time. Absolutely. In fact, they have to, right?
Yes.
It's required in order to maintain their health, maintain their bone density, which ultimately, keeps them working efficiently while they are on station. But it's also part of the study of how microgravity impacts the human body in terms of, hey, if you do this exercise, what is the result? Are you still maintaining the level of health necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a few different exercise machines on the space station. So I was talking with Shiva. There's a treadmill that you have to kind of wear a belt, and it's hooked to the treadmill itself, so that as you're running, you're not kind of floating off with every step you take. There's also a stationary bike, and then there's also the advanced resistive exercise device. We call it ARED. It can be modified so that you can use it to do arm workouts, leg workouts, anything from bicep curls to squats, even ab workouts. So they've done a great job at providing options up there, and the crew members are assigned to each one. So they don't get to choose a favorite and only get on the treadmill every day. They have to make sure that they're also maintaining their muscle mass and their bone density with a little bit of weightlifting as well.
One thing that I never took into consideration until I heard it called out during the Crew 6 docking period was basically the Capcom at Mission Control in Houston, I think, was talking to Josh Cassada. I can't quite remember, but it was speaking to one of the astronauts on station and basically told them, hey, you can't do your workout as scheduled because we're about to dock Crew 6, and just the vibrations created from the exercise in the space station, even though it is a really big floating laboratory, it's not floating, orbiting, it was, I never really thought that it had that much of an impact to other things until we heard that call out during that docking where we were right about to dock, and it was basically like, hey, hold off on your scheduled exercise for right now.
Right. We heard that yesterday as well before undock. So just want to mitigate any of those things that might impart loads on the International Space Station when you're in a dynamic event like a docking or an undocking. But of course, they do try and schedule their workouts around those times.
Yeah. Let's take a look at another question. We have a couple minutes here, about 7.5 minutes until that loss of signal.
SpaceX Dragon, all crew, satchels are secure, restraints tightened, the visors are down.
Dragon, we copy. Visors are down, restraints are tight, and tablets and satchels and loose items are secured.
All right, good call out there, just indicating that the crew has everything in place, locked away, make sure nothing pardon me, nothing can escape its secure location during the re-entry portion, and the visors are down. So basically, the crew is locked and loaded, ready to come home. Taking a look at this question coming to us from Taniko. Wow, this is tough. Taniko Tikza Baloy. I apologize for not pronouncing that correctly. When the Dragon approaches Earth, how do you make sure that it does not collide with airplanes in flight? That's a great question. So part of the process to launch a spacecraft or bring it home is basically to get a license from the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, and basically request that airspace and sea space be quarantined off in a keep-out zone, basically, so that aircraft and sea vessels are not in danger during this phase. So, yeah, it's a great question, because you really have to think of, because the Earth is a sphere, it's a globe, it is a three-dimensional process to re-enter the atmosphere. It's not just coming back down to Earth. It is that three-dimensional space, that airspace that has to be cleared and saved, basically. Great question.
That is a good question. And I've seen some pretty amazing pictures before of people in commercial airplanes as they are en route somewhere and can see one of the spacecrafts lift off. So I would love to have that opportunity someday.
Same. Although with how often we're launching out of Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, it's certainly more likely now than it ever has been to catch a rocket launch from your window seat while flying into Orlando Airport. Another question coming to us, this one from Joshua Green. How do the departing astronauts make sure they don't accidentally leave any of their stuff on the International Space Station? And has anyone forgotten anything up there?
Well, there are checklists to make sure that the astronauts don't leave anything on the space station. And of course, I'm sure something has been left behind at some point, but there's always somebody going up and coming back down. So maybe one of their friends is kind enough to bring it back for them. The crew members themselves have a very limited amount of space of what they can choose to take up. I've heard it referred to as maybe like a shoebox size. So they might take up photos or jewelry or special mementos for their friends or family back home. So those things I'm sure they keep close personal track of. But then additionally, there is a lot of cargo or scientific research that is loaded back onto Dragon before it comes home. So there are teams specifically dedicated to tracking the locations of items on the International Space Station and make sure that our crew members load them up before it's time to come home.
That's a good question.
That is.
Next one coming to us from Sooner Source. My son Dex would like to know how fast the capsule is going when it hits the water. Oh, that's actually a really great question. I'll back up first. When the capsule is on station and when it departs the space station, it's going 17,500 miles per hour or thereabout.
Yes.
It's going really, really fast. And then we do that deorbit burn, which helps to slow the vehicle down significantly. But at that point in time, it's still going, I want to say it's about 500 miles per hour as it re-enters the atmosphere. That heat shield that we talked about before is actually going to do a lot of work that gets converted into the form of heat, that plasma that builds up, and actually slows it down. So the Earth's atmosphere is actually going to help us out in slowing the vehicle down even further as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. And then we have those two sets of parachutes. Oh.
Dragon, SpaceX for entry briefing.
Go for Dragon.
Okay, just to give you a quick update here for timeline, we are tracking no deltas in terms of vehicle status. Only item to note is that you may get the AGPS alerts when you come back out of blackout. Just wanted to give you an update that if those have the SDC at the end of it, there's no concern. It has no impact on Dragon's automated automated chute deployment sequence. How copy?
Okay, copy. We may get the APGS alerts if it's got Sierra Delta Charlie. That's no impact.
Those are good words. Other than that, the weather's still looking good, and we're looking forward to getting you home shortly. Expected blackout time is in approximately 2 minutes or so. We'll see you on the other side at 0156 Zulu.
Copy. See you on the other side.
Wow, we got to that anticipated blackout time pretty quickly. So again, that's coming up at about 5:58 p.m. Pacific time, about 5:48 p.m. Pacific time. And so about 30 seconds from now, we will be out of communication with the astronauts and the Crew Dragon capsule during that time. Again, we are in that communications blackout period. It's just begun.
That's right. We're expecting that to last about 7 minutes due to the formation of plasma around the spacecraft. During that time, no vehicle telemetry is received by mission control or the recovery team, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. As a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself, though. During reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from the orbital velocity of 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature that Dragon will experience upon that reentry, in terms of the exterior temperature, is around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So as we mentioned before, we expect this blackout period to last several minutes. We are basically now in that reentry period, and we anticipate this we anticipate getting that signal back in about 5 minutes from now.
This is moving pretty quickly because we are anticipating those drogue parachutes to deploy at about 5:58 p.m. Pacific time. So really just 7 minutes from now. We're looking at splashdown around 11 minutes from now. So this is a very quick timeline. A lot of things happening in rapid succession as our crew members come home. But again, we've heard good reports so far, and we are awaiting that acquisition of signal in around 4.5 minutes.
Now, one thing that if we were able to get views inside the Dragon capsule, which, like we said before, because of that plasma buildup, we are unable to get those views. But if you were watching earlier in the webcast, you did see those crew displays, those touchscreen panels that the crew was using to monitor the health of the capsule, the state of what was, the state of command for what the Dragon capsule was actually executing. As of right now, they also now have a little map that shows where they are and how much further they have to go for this reentry. They will be able to follow along with the anticipated deployment of those parachutes. One thing that the crew is trained to do is be aware of the surroundings. And of course, when those parachutes deploy, because they are slowing the capsule down, there is a small jolt that occurs during that deployment. And so, and also whenever they splash down, you'll also hear brace for splashdown or brace for impact. That is just the crew being aware and just getting ready, holding on to their seats for those moments where there's a little bit more of a noticeable feel to where they are in their seats.
Right, and I think it's very interesting after watching so many splashdowns, whenever we have main parachute deploy, they don't open to their full ballooned shape right away. They do something called reefing. So they open up quite slowly, or sometimes it appears that way. That way, that jolt is not, it's not exaggerated any more than it has to be. So they open up slowly and slow the spacecraft down again to about 16 miles per hour.
Again, we're in the anticipated loss of signal. There's 2 minutes, or about somewhere between 2 and 3.5 minutes remaining. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly when we'll be able to get that signal back, but in about 3 minutes, we will start hearing the core reach out to the crew to see if they can make that connection. Once again, the loss of signal is expected, totally normal, due to that buildup of plasma around the exterior of the capsule.
And we also have our recovery teams already on site, already on Shannon, the SpaceX recovery ship, and that is waiting off the coast of Tampa. Some of those team members arrived by helicopter. We have one of our NASA public affairs officers also on.
And there's our first view of the Crew 5 crew in Dragon Endurance re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
So this is a view from the recovery ship itself of Crew Dragon re-entering Earth's atmosphere. Of course, we still do not have communication with them because you can see that plasma buildup as they are coming through the atmosphere, that heat shield doing all of the work to ablate that heat as it builds up around the capsule. So again, as we mentioned, you see the movements here. That's the ship camera moving and continuing to track the spacecraft during re-entry. We anticipate reacquisition of signal in just a couple of minutes from now. As Kate mentioned, it can vary on when we get that timing. But great to already have a view of our 4 astronauts, or 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut inside as they are headed home. There will also be a couple of sonic booms during that time frame.
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck.
So as I mentioned, the SpaceX core.
SpaceX Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
We have you the same. Good to have you back. Expect automated chute deployment.
Dragon, copy.
You know, it's incredible to know that the voice we're hearing is coming from that gorgeous ball of light.
And all of the other little points of light you see around it, they appear to be streaking on the camera a little bit. Those are stars. Obviously, that beautiful bright light in the middle, that's Crew Dragon Endurance coming home after 157 days in space. We are standing by for drogue parachute deployment. That'll be in about 2 minutes, but we already do have acquisition of signal. That came, again, a little bit earlier than we expected. So
that's right.
It is a little hard to target sometimes.
GPS has converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
Dragon, copy.
Again, that point of light in the center of your screen, that is Dragon Endurance. Another, a different view. This one infrared coming from the recovery ship. As we were mentioning, all of those team members that are ready to recover the astronauts are on the ship. They're in position. It'll take just a little bit for them to move in toward the capsule once it lands, but they all have a very important and distinct role to play, either retrieving the capsule or helping the astronauts egress, and they are all standing by.
At this point in time, Dragon Endurance is about to deploy the drogue parachutes. Those automatically deploy around the 18,000 foot mark, and the capsule's going about 350 miles per hour.
Brace for drogue window.
Dragon, brace.
So just a call out there to let the crew know that they are approaching that window where the drogue parachutes will automatically deploy.
And just prior to the deployment, Dragon automatically safes the propulsion system and then deploys the parachutes to stabilize and help decelerate the spacecraft.
So like we said, we're getting ready for those drogue parachutes to deploy on Dragon. That occurs automatically when it's about 18,000 feet above the ocean surface. And the capsule is going roughly 350 miles per hour. In that view before, there was a difference in, here we can see, it's no longer quite streaking like it was just moments ago, or minutes ago, I should say. Like I said before, it looks like those drogue deploys are now, yep. We got
Visual on 2 healthy drogues.
Dragon copy.
As you can see with that infrared view, we have 2 healthy drogue parachutes on Dragon. There's a view from Dragon looking up at the drogue chutes.
Those will remain attached to the spacecraft until they help deploy the main parachutes, coming up in just a few moments. Again, these views coming to us from the recovery ship standing by to recover our crew members once they splash down. Looks like we
It looks like we have main parachute deployment there.
Main chute descent rate nominal.
Dragon copies, 1,000 meters.
Beautiful.
Copy, 1,000.
Beautiful view there from that recovery vessel of Dragon Endurance with those 4 healthy main parachutes. At this point in time, the capsule's going about 119, or was going about 119 miles per hour when those were deployed, and they also deployed about 6,500 feet. So these main parachutes will help slow the vehicle down even further to about
800 meters.
Copy, 800.
So that we'll hear from the crew about how far they are above the surface of the water. So there we just heard that call out for 800 meters. The capsule is slowing down further and further. By the time that it actually splashes down, it'll only be going about 16 miles per hour.
It's fascinating to think that just minutes ago, really, they were in outer
600 meters.
space
Copy, 600.
and are now just 600 meters above Earth. Again, we are targeting a 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time, splashdown 6:02 p.m. Pacific. So that is the next major milestone for us today, now that we have 4 healthy main parachutes all deployed. Things continue to look good aboard Dragon.
That's right. We're about a little less than a minute and a half away from the crew splashing
meters.
down.
Copy, 400 meters.
Once again, we are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida near Tampa. So this is what we would consider a Gulf landing.
And those strobes of light on your screen, those are spotlights coming from the recovery vessels as they continue to track Dragon Endurance.
200 meters, crew brace for splashdown.
Copy, 200 and braced.
Commander Nicole Mann giving out that call as we are standing by for splashdown off the coast of Tampa, Florida.
There we can see the water surface. Dragon Endurance coming closer and closer. And as you just saw, splashdown of Crew 5.
157 days in space.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. Names have been released.
Copy, Dragon. We concur with splashdown and mains released. Dragon Endurance, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
As you can see on your screen, visual confirmation for splashdown.
Thank you, SpaceX. That was on one heck of a ride. We're happy to be home. Looking forward to next time.
Dragon Endurance has returned home, and NASA astronauts Nicole Mann and Josh Cassada, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina are back on Earth after an approximately 19-hour return journey from space. The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon's splashdown, and now, as you can see, they're making their way to that splashdown location.
Right, and these teams have been ready and been waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it'll take them around 30 minutes to make their way to Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna inside Dragon. We will be listening for Mission Control Hawthorne to give the go for the safe approach now that we have Splashdown. There are several different roles. There is an approach boat that will begin inspections. They want to make sure that there aren't any hypergalls, monomethylhydrazine, and nitrogen tetroxide still lingering around the spacecraft. That way it is safe for the teams to move in even closer and retrieve it.
Yeah, the crew will basically approach the capsule and they use what's basically a sniffing device, a device that can detect those levels of MMH and NTO. They are toxic to breathe, and so this is a super important step to complete.
SpaceX Dragon, looks like we are in stable 1, although a little tough to...
Copy that, Dragon. We concur, and I'm happy to report that the recovery personnel have also confirmed stable 1.
Awesome, thank you.
So just some communication there back and forth with SpaceX Core, Michael Blasco, and Capsule Commander Nicole Mann, just to confirm the landing position of the capsule itself. As we can see there on your screen, even better now with that spotlight, the crew, the recovery team is approaching the capsule. They are going to make sure that that monomethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide is not present on the exterior of the vehicle.